You notice that's always different every time I play that theme because, well, I don't know. But that's sort of the working theme for book lunch. I decided to do it a little more, maybe a little more Count Basie kind of it's different. I think it's really I'm have a lot of gratitude actually to music as a form and as a language that it enables one to do things like that, and that's a whole other, again, this is not a music episode, but I just thought it'd be fun to talk about that. It might relate to today's show, actually. I don't know. But I'm just gonna move on into our subject, which is the second episode of Life of the Mind by Hannah Arendt. Life of the Mind. Today we did a what was it, over an hour long episode on just the introduction. Finally, we're going to get to chapter 1, thinking. This whole book is thinking, of course. So I really appreciate it. I want to thank everybody for coming out. 1,000 views, which is, I don't know what to say about that except thank you. I suppose Arendt'a is, it's in the nature of arts and letters is the formulation I would first use, but culture more generally, that things come and go. They rise and fall. There's fortune and misfortune, and things are in and hip, as we used to say hip, many years ago. And then they're not as hip, and so who knows, maybe Hannah Arendt is in now. I got to tell you, I've been into Hannah Arendt for 40 years. So in other words, for me, it's a little, my relationship to her is not so much, actually not at all, about whether she's more popular now or less popular. I consider her, I'm going to be I've said this before, I'll say it again, this text is alongside, and she would strongly, my apologies to her because she didn't think she was this good. This is a great book. This is alongside Kant, alongside an Oscar Peterson solo, Herbie Hancock piano solo, Bob Dylan song. I'll fill in the blanks. This is alongside certainly Karl Jaspers, one of her teachers. Wonderful, wonderful German philosopher who was a big influence on her. Bernard Williams, Isaiah Berlin, Stuart Hampshire. These are just names, but I think she's in their company. She's certainly, George Kateb, who was on my show. I've been very fortunate to have episodes with some really important philosophers. Robert Pippin, George Kateb. She's in league with them, so she's worth reading. Anyhow, let's get to the book. I don't quite know. Again, we have a lot of wires and equipment over here, and I don't really know. Get in my chair here. We're dealing with a situation where I'm trying to figure out, how to proceed, because just like the music I just played, some things are very planned, sometimes strictly. We have a melody and we have the chord progression, we have the measures, but sometimes you want to leave it up to contingency and spontaneity, and so some things you plan, some things you don't want to plan. And it's no different for these episodes. So even though I do have a course plan and it's a traditional lecture type of thing I'm doing here, I might change my mind. Like today, I'm thinking I'm not going to show a film clip. I might not. Because I don't know, because maybe it should happen later in the series, or maybe, I don't know. Also because I want to really do the close reading and dig into her text. because it's as good. If it's as good as I said it is, I could be wrong. Look, it's one man's opinion. I think it's good and important, but what do I know, right? I've read all this stuff, though. That's sort of a, that counts for something. I mean, it isn't like I haven't read this stuff, and I've read all the people I just mentioned and all that. And in some instances, I've read, for example, Bernard Williams, philosopher, who I never tire of praising. His work is relatable and accessible, but there's a difficulty, there's a density. It's a better word than difficult. Actually, Richard Poirier, the English teacher. I mean, he founded the Library of America and the great journal Raritan. Richard Poirier was a big influence on so many people, like Mark Edmundson, and he taught at Harvard. In any event, he has a kind of an interesting binary formulation that he came up with: density and difficulty. And Richard Poirier always loved the dense and thought less of the difficult. And again, I'm not doing justice to Poirier's formulation, but according to Poirier, Robert Frost, for him, I'm not taking a side, was a better poet than T.S. Eliot, and was dense. Whereas for him, T.S. Eliot was merely difficult. So it's kind of he's just having fun as a really wonderful writer. The Work of Knowing, his book on Robert Frost, and his work on style in American literature, A Place Elsewhere, and anyhow, and then the other thing about Richard Poirier as a critic, he loved 2001: Space Odyssey by Kubrick. He's one of those folks I think thought it was the greatest movie ever made. In one of my episodes of Aesthetics, I'm going to deal with his great essay, Learning from the Beatles. In 1966, I have an original first edition of Richard Poirier's essay on Sgt. Pepper and the Beatles. Wonderful. Anyhow, why am I going on and on about him? Well, these formulations sometimes are slippery. Just like I said in my last episode, there's things that are continental and things that are Anglo-American. Bernard Williams is British, taught at Oxford, so he's clearly not continental in that sense. He's not European, he's English or he's British. And there's some truth to that, but it's not everything. And it's much more, of course, nuanced than that, much more complicated than that. And even Richard Poirier's idea that Robert Frost is dense, I mean, that's an interesting thing to think about. I mean, I will say this. I will say that today people debate deeply the meanings and the significance of Frost poems as much as they do The Wasteland, right? So that's just an example. And so today I'm going to jump into this book and sort of close reading. So I'm going to start off here. I'm going to do two things at once at the same time. Let's see. I normally can't do two things at once. I can only do one thing at a time. Like I couldn't play this piano and carry on a conversation. Sorry, I just couldn't really, I don't think, or I'm just, there's actually a certain school of scientific psychology. I don't agree with that whole school, but I do agree with this one thing they say. They say that actually no human being has ever multitasked, that actually it doesn't exist in the world. I don't know. They think it's like something people think that they're doing, or when people do it, one of the things goes badly because we're not meant to multitask. I don't know. Who knows? These are just things I read, in scientific literature, and it's for fun. I have a high curiosity, so I read an enormous amount of literature by psychologists, scientists, natural scientists. I like to read, and I read. I think, well, that's interesting, and and when I read these texts, of course, I'm reading as someone who's read all of Kant and Hegel and Hannah Arendt, and I've read Darwin's Origin of the Species, so I have a background of information and learning to sort of evaluate things in a certain way. I can say, well, this might be not so original, or this might be, I don't know, but I'm going to try to do justice to this book. I'm also going to take a drink of Think coffee. Are there any New Yorkers out there, or someone? Do you remember Think? They're very clever. They made their coffee. I think they made their coffee mugs for the left-handed. I am right-handed. I'm hyper right-handed. So this is kind of awkward for me. I'm using that. Maybe I should think, because we're doing a book on thinking. See, if I were being a little bit fanciful, I would say that everything came together. That I bought these Think coffee mugs, and now I'm doing a series on thinking by Hannah Arendt, The Life of the Mind, and maybe it was not a coincidence that all these things came together. I don't know. I'm just having fun, but let's get a little more serious. Chapter 1, Appearance. And she starts with a quote from W.H. Auden, speaking of poets and great poets. Auden was one of them, is one of them. Auden says, does God ever judge us by appearances? I suspect that he does. That's W.H. Auden, and then we reflect on that and we go into number 1, the world's phenomenal nature. Now, I'm going to say a few things before we dig in, just to get some context here now. Arendt'a was a genius. And sometimes geniuses, especially in this continental tradition, which is so opposed to and at odds with and at variance from, Ed Bernard Williams or a more British type of thinker, likes to sometimes could be accused of inventing new definitions for old words, or maybe not willfully and woefully misunderstanding what a word is. And some, of course, critics of her would say, well, she doesn't know what thinking is. She's inventing, and even, it's funny, there's letters between her and Mary McCarthy where Mary McCarthy says, do you really mean what you say about thoughtlessness? And there's actually a very serious debate about German, English, Greek, those 3 languages, and thoughtlessness. And so there's another where she says, do you mean imbecility, meaning mental challenge, or what they would said then, mental retardation, or stupidity, or do you mean something more sinister, like kind of close to Arendt's work on Eichmann and the Holocaust, like willful thoughtlessness, like not caring about others and not thinking of others? Those are different, all under the rubric of different kinds of thoughtlessness, right? So that's interesting to keep that in mind. Now, Arendt'a, of course, is aware of all these things, and she does tend to sometimes present her own definitions of things. Now, in this tradition, and she's part of a tradition, these, like Kant, her favorite, right? That's okay to do that. It's not okay in some other traditions, and a lot of it has to do with what kind of philosopher. I've said on this show, there's different ways to make a movie. There's different ways to write a novel. There's not one kind of novel. Look, oh goodness, Jonathan Franzen, the Corrections, Tom Wolfe, these older, I don't know, those are very different novels than, I don't know, just take a pick, than Ernest Hemingway, Light in August by William Faulkner. They're all different. They're all novels, and we recognize, or the Bret Easton Ellis. I just did Bret Easton Ellis, The Shards. I mean, that's filled with topicality and sex and pop imagery and consumer brands and consumer items in his novel, because that's what he's writing about. There are works of fiction that they almost exist. If you were to read To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf, strange comparison, but let's go with it. Different eras and different, you almost wouldn't be sure of actually where you are. In other words, there's an interesting essay about Henry James that said that Henry James purposely leaves out things of the world, or left out, not only leave out brand names, but wanted to give the reader this sense of kind of floating consciousness, not tethered to reality. Well, anyhow, there are some novelists that want to do that, and those novelists are not going to emphasize where you are, right, or sociological details. There are other novelists, of course, usually on the political left, not always, but usually, who feel that those details are everything, class position and the experience of suffering and being oppressed. So there's actually, they don't think that highly of leaving that stuff out of their novel and their fiction. They want to include everything and they want to create the texture. My point is that it's not really about right or wrong. These are just, it's like different styles, different ways of playing piano. They're just, and I hope, in 2024, we can live in a world in which we could think they all these have value and are worthy of our attention and not having to pick and choose and all this. And anyhow, enough of that. I'm being a little bit too, I'll rein in my polemic a little bit here. I just thought I would get that out of the way, and that she's in a tradition, and when we're doing this close reading of her, we're entering her, trying to enter into her, as I still used to say, her scene. There's a wonderful Terry Southern short story, Red Dirt Marijuana and Other Tastes, I think from 1966. I love Terry Southern. He wrote Dr. Strangelove, Magic Christian Candy, right? There's the character in Terry Southern's novel says, "Hey, man, that's a scene I don't make." And that's often something I'll say was something I don't want to be a part of. Like somebody says, there's a Trump rally down the because a scene I don't make. Man, I don't make that scene. I'm not going there. But just to kind of give you a sense of to be humorous. But let's get serious. We're doing Hannah Arendt. I need to put aside humor here. All right. Number one, we finally get to her text. Instead of me going on and on and on. It's fun though. The world's phenomenal nature. I'm going to read once this paragraph. Once, okay? Then I'm going to go back and we're going to talk about aspects of the paragraph. And again, remember I said we're going to do dual purposes. We're going to read this text as a work of art. It's a work of art that's using syntax, which is what writing is. Syntax, sentences, paragraphs, beautifully constructed, formally constructed by her, with help and commentary from Mary McCarthy, of course, their editor. And when all that's done, we have this. We're reading this. That's a truly remarkable thing. It's interesting. So let's keep that in mind. This is constructed. There are writers that want to construct and hide the constructiveness of their prose under a belief in authenticity. In other words, no editing. There's a little bit Jack Kerouac, that's usually, by the way, that's also a politically left-wing perspective. My voice, don't censor me. There's that mode, and that's the opposite of Hannah Arendt. Hannah Arendt wants to construct, and we're better off for it because, my God, this is a beautiful paragraph. I mean, I wish people wrote this way today. Look, I try to. This is when I write, I look at this. And this is. I don't want to make too much out of it, but I don't want to treat Hannah Arendt as if she's just delivering content. That is just delivering information. In other words, I'm actually less interested in whether Hannah Arendt is right about what a thought is than these things I'm talking about now, making a beautiful piece of writing, which actually, interestingly enough, has make a beautiful piece of writing that might have its own truth and all its own fact. And so I would say correctness by virtue of that. Not entirely. You could sell swill and propaganda. That's beautifully done. I get it. But we're leaving aside those exceptions. We're just dealing with this. So let's do the paragraph. And I hope I do justice to it because it's a phenomenal way to open a book. The world men are born into contains many things, natural and artificial, living and dead, transient and sempiternal, all of which have in common that they appear, and hence are meant to be seen, heard, touched, tasted, and smelled, to be perceived by sentient creatures endowed with the appropriate sense organs. Persons. Nothing could appear, the word quote, appearance, unquote, would make no sense if recipients of appearances did not exist. Living creatures able to acknowledge, recognize, and react to, in flight or desire, approval or disapproval, blame or praise, what is not merely there, but appears to them and is meant for their perception. In this world which we enter appearing from a nowhere, and from which we disappear into a nowhere. So interesting. Deal with this. Right? Disappear into a nowhere. Being and appearing coincide. Period. Dead matter, natural and artificial, changing and unchanging, depends in its being, that is, in its appearingness, on the presence of living creatures. Pause there. Nothing and nobody exists in this world whose very being does not presuppose a spectator. Spectator is italicized, by the way. In other words, nothing that is, insofar as it appears, exists in the singular. Everything that is meant to be perceived by somebody, not man, man is capitalized, M, but men, plural, men, not man, but men inhabit this planet. Drum roll, end of the paragraph. Plurality is the law of the earth. That's the first paragraph. I'm going to sit with that. I'm going to go get my glasses in here. Look, that's our first paragraph. You know, there's a lot there. Yeah. All right. Plurality is the law of the earth. Now, okay. So, I don't know much, but I do know that if an author says something is law, that's kind of the strongest assertion you can make about the thing. In other words, a law implies something sort of fixed. So I've said before many times, I'm a pluralist. Of course, we're going to be reading a text by a fellow pluralist, right? I'm biased. You know, that's why we're reading Hannah Arendt, not somebody else. But let's get more serious about it. Like, what does it mean to be a pluralist? What does she mean when she says that man doesn't exist, but men exist? And what does it mean when she says plurality is the law of the earth? What does she mean by, and she uses the word spectator in a positive. This is also very important for her. That's a positive, not a negative. An appearance for her. So, shorthand, she's in this text, this paragraph, she's waging war against some of Plato's ideas about illusion and reality. And some metaphysical traditions too, by the way, that argue the world is unreal or illusory. She's telling you, I'm not buying that. She's saying things show up, and it seems to me that if they show up and they appear, that ought to count for something. It's sort of a more kind of down home way. And so you kind of should judge, as the W.H. Allen quote in the beginning, judge by appearances, or at least judge by what people do. So to get back to the more difficult, I've been put a million people in an oven and killed all these millions of people. That from her point of view, you ought to look at that more than other things, because that's something that appeared and happened, is one of the worst things that can happen to people, right? That's kind of where she's getting at, partly. I'm exaggerating, of course. She likes Plato. Plato is one of the great philosophers. She's, when someone like Hannah Arendt criticizes the allegory of the cave, which he's going to do, like me, she loves that text. She loves that allegory. Okay, it's beautiful. I mean, looking at it as an aesthetic, as a text, right? So again, that's kind of where she's coming from. So I'm trying to do a little bit of a close reading here. So in that sense, things appear. But the beauty of the prose, so for example, the world men are born into contains many things, natural and artificial, living and dead, transient and sempiternal. She doesn't use the word eternal. She doesn't say transient and permanent. She doesn't say transient and eternal. She says transient and sempiternal. Doesn't that go better with the T of transient? There's a little poetry in this language. Very continental. Again, like some of the German and French writers, sentences matter, and word choice might matter a little bit more than you got the facts, truth and falsity, these kind of. Seen, heard, touched, taste, smell, to be perceived by sentient creatures endowed. Does that sound familiar to endowed? Where is that language? What famous document? We are endowed. What is she riffing on there? Yes, the Declaration of Independence, which is a text she knew and loved very deeply. Now, of course, I'm not saying that, There's also interesting question, of course, about everything's working towards that final sentence, plurality is the law of the earth. There's a very famous quote by a very dubious philosopher. And I don't remember the philosopher. And when I say dubious, he was either, from my point of view, dubious. He was either anti-democratic or anti-liberal in some way, which for me is always a red flag, was for some kind of authoritarianism or something, or maybe even racist. I don't know. I don't remember. But the quote is, I've never met a person. I've only met Poles and Czechs and French people and, et cetera, et cetera. That of course is the sinister or negative form. Again, Hannah Arendt is not of that party at all. That may sound superficially pluralistic, but that dubious thinker, certainly has ideas about hierarchies and who gets to lead on virtue of that. No, Hannah Arendt is that everybody's in this text. We're creatures and we're all in this together. We're all in this together and we all show up for each other, whether we like it or not. We may not be up to it. We may not want to appear. Hannah Arendt says, tough, you got to appear if you're going to leave the four walls of your house. And this, of course, admittedly connects to her Hannah Arendt is a political thinker above all, in a sense. For her, politics are very, very important. Much more important than they are for me. I got news for you. I'm not as political as she is. There's a famous, she repeated many times, somebody asked her, I think maybe Richard Bernstein or one of the people that knew Hannah Arendt and worked with her said, Hannah Arendt, when did you stop writing about being and time and metaphysics and philosophy, kind of this kind of philosophy, and when did you leave that behind Because remember, she says, I'm not a philosopher. Why did she say that? She said the burning of the Reichstag. So that one tragic, awful event, that's when you said, boom, my life's going to change. I have to do something. So that's a strong incentive, the burning of the Reichstag, right, in Germany. And so that's why she becomes a politico, if we want to use that term, and political, right? And that set the trajectory for her life. And to a large extent, it's why she wrote books like The Origin of Totalitarianism and wrote about labor and work and Men in Dark Times. And you know, it's still, sometimes one event can happen. In her case, Nazism, the emergence of Nazism, that just sets you on a course. You have to respond to it. And that's an example of that. But all the while she's doing that, there's this other Hannah Arendt that comes in this book, where she wants to go back to origins and beginnings and things that are sempiternal, to use her word. Sempiternal. I like that. So she's established, she says the world is plural, which is what she's saying there too, and this might connect to the Declaration of Independence, I don't know. That this plurality is that, trying to think of how to formulate this. It's a law. So again, when you say law, that's something you can't argue with. It just is. So you got to deal with it, right? But there's a sense in which it kind of has to be this way for her. In other words, we're supposed to be plural in a way that I said earlier, music's supposed to sound different from other music. We need different types of movies. We need different types of songs. We need different types of music. We need different types of people in a sense. And so there's a kind of a little bit of a normative dimension as well as a descriptive dimension. So she's describing, this is the law of the earth. Like you cannot like gravity, but you got to deal with gravity, assuming that gravity is a law, right? Or evolution or any other kind of thing that there's a consensus around, or, you know, putting all that off to one side, you got to deal with it. But also there's a sense in which maybe it's a good thing we are plural. Does she think that? Let's see. Let's move a little bit ahead. What she says about that. Since sentient beings, men and animals, to whom things appear, and who as recipients guarantee their reality, are themselves also appearances, meant and able both to see and be seen. I'm going to start over because it's a flow. I want to get the flow right. Beautiful. Look, I mean, she's writing like, look, I mean, this is a work of nonfiction, but this passage is beautiful as anything I've read in Proust or George Eliot or Henry James. You know, she's really, I mean, I got to give her credit. She's a prose stylist. Here's an example of what I'm talking about. Since sentient beings, men and animals, to whom things appear and who as recipients guarantee the reality, are themselves also appearances, meant and able both to see and be seen, hear and be heard, touch and be touched. They are never mere subjects and can never be understood as such. They are no less objective than stone in bridge. So she's making an even stronger claim than her law sentence. So she's saying that appearances are as objective as objects in the world. And if you read even deeper into those, she's saying that our feelings, she's saying feelings are fact, actually. Feelings are facts. In a way, I mean, she's close to saying that in that passage. Close to saying that. She hasn't, I don't know, right? I mean, again, I'm a little bit, just bear with me here. So she's writing this text in the context. She's writing this in 1970, 71. The world is on fire, the Vietnam War and then Watergate. And she's moved by all that. But she's, here we go. She's also writing in a context where it was very fashionable Actually, it's very fashionable now. I mean, I don't want to point fingers and certain schools of thought to say that things aren't real, things don't exist, things are illusions. Like it's very fashionable among some scientists to say that consciousness does not exist. There are people that think that it's an illusion. That's fine. They want to think that. You got to come up with some pretty good evidence if you're gonna say that. But again, I don't want to get too. But she's responding to that in a way. She says she doesn't like what she's hearing. She's saying, no, right? The worldliness of living things. Living things are worldly. They're not worldless. They're not otherworldly. So Hannah Arendt's spirituality, the degree to which a spirituality is about this world. It's about not separating, that it's all right here in front of us, not somewhere else. And that's why things matter for her, right? That's kind of where she's coming from a little bit. The worldliness of living things means that there is no subject that is not also an object, and appears as such to somebody else who guarantees its objective reality. What we usually call consciousness, the fact that I am aware of myself, and therefore, in a sense, can appear to myself, would never suffice to guarantee reality. So she's saying that initial part of consciousness is not sufficient in a way. And then she tears into Descartes here and shows where he went wrong. Again, Descartes got some things right. He wasn't all bad. I remember back in the 90s was a real, especially among metaphysical people, a real fondness for attacking Cartesianism. And I remember Ken Wilber, the Buddhist, said, well, Descartes really means this, and he's not all bad. But I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of Descartes. But she does say here, Descartes' cogiti me cogitiro ergo sum, the Latin, I think therefore I am. It's famous. That's what Descartes said. She says Descartes' cogito me ergo sum is a non sequitur, for the simple reason that this res cogitans never appears at all unless its cogitiones are made manifest in sounding out or written down speech, which is already meant for and presupposes auditors and readers as its recipients. So she's saying Descartes didn't take into account the fact that, he didn't take into account the fact that somebody's going to want to stand on a rock and say something to somebody, to put it in a crude way, or make some kind of a speech. And somebody's going to want to write a poem, or play a tune. People want to do these things. And she's saying Descartes leaves out, that's to appear. That's for Hannah Arendt, we live in the world, we share the world. We are not, and we actually notably should not be hermits. Hannah Arendt doesn't think we should be hermits. There's a problem. She says problems with, or at least pure, we have obligations to other people. We live in society. We have relationships. That's kind of that's the spirit of that passage. Again, we can agree or disagree, but that's a little bit of the spirit. We appear, we share the world. But she gets even more, this is so interesting. So, seen from the perspective of the world, every creature born into it arrives well equipped. We're born well equipped. That in itself, I didn't even finish the sentence. Isn't that extraordinarily optimistic on her part? We have what we need. It's what she's saying. She's saying we're born with what we need already. Don't worry about it. Kind of, a little bit. Okay, go ahead. Right. Seen with respect to the world, every creature born into it arrives well equipped to deal with the world in which being and appearing coincide. They are fit for worldly existence. Again, optimism's not the word. It's a life affirming. This is a text. She's almost dead when she writes this, and this is one of the most. This is like this. This is almost Emersonian. I don't know if she knew Emerson, but this is like reading. Goodness, compensation. It's romantic, and it's just beautiful, beautiful prose. I mean, goodness, get excited about this stuff. Sorry, beautiful. Where was I? Oh, living beings are not just in the world. So that living beings, men and animals, are not just in the world. They are of the world. She italicizes that clause, of the world. They are of the world. We're at home. She's saying we're at home. And this precisely because they are subjects and objects, perceiving and being perceived at the same time. So we got to the second page of the chapter 1. Take a break here. Think about that. Talk amongst yourselves. I don't know. I'm right-handed. Sorry. You're not going to see the Think logo. It's really important, I think, to have a sense of humor about ourselves and laugh at ourselves, I think. I just think it's good, Not all the time, but a little bit. So she's on a roll in this text. She goes even further. Just when you think, wow, is Arendt. All right. Nothing perhaps is more surprising in this world of ours than the almost infinite diversity of its appearances. This is going to strike you as the sheer entertainment value of its views, sounds, and smells. So she's saying the world has entertainment value. And then she goes on to make a dig at all the philosophers. She's very critical of many philosophers. She's critical of Plato, of course, for his Plato is judgmental about people liking appearances too much and wants you to get to the truth beneath or against appearance and all that. She's, of course, critiquing that. But look what she says after this kind of interesting phrase of entertainment value, right? She says, something that is hardly ever mentioned by the thinkers and philosophers. So her dig is that they're not talking about what's important. So she's saying you could read the whole corpus of philosophy. You could read your Plato and your Aristotle and Kant and all these folks, and you would never know what? You would never know that the world had views, smells, sounds, and that it appeared. She's saying this is connected to her attack on fascism and Stalinism and almost all forms of communism and dictatorship. For her, what is their sin? What do they go wrong? They don't take the world as it appears. They're always have their guard up. They're always fighting reality rather than working with reality, rather than having, well, frankly, awe and gratitude for all that appears, and sort of this miracle of life type of discourse. I mean, that of course is often misused today by many religious folks and all that. But what I'm saying is that there's a kind of a wonderment, astonishment, and wonder. She's saying you would read all these philosophers, and most of them you would never know there was anything wonderful about the world, or anything astonishing about it. Something's amiss here, is what she's saying. Look, you never know it to read these philosophers. They never mention it. She does praise Aristotle again. Nora Arendt liked Aristotle more than I do, although it makes me want to go back and read the Poetics. He's so great. He's so great, Aristotle. That's it. World Enough in Time. What if World Enough in Time? Andrew Marvel. We could be here episode after episode all day and do all. We can't do everything. When we get my Aristotle. Poetics. She says, only Aristotle, at least incidentally, counted the life of passive enjoyment of the pleasures our bodily organs provide us as among the three ways of life that can be elected by those who, not being subject to necessity, can devote themselves to the kalon, K-A-L-O-N, kalon. It's these terms from the Greek, to what is beautiful in opposition to what is necessary and useful. So she's saying that Aristotle, of course, has many taxonomies, and there's necessity and there's freedom in Aristotle. And she's saying that she gives Aristotle credit because Aristotle said that if a human being used their sense organs if they were just a hedonist and just indulge in pleasure, Aristotle might say that's a lower kind of life, but he would still say that it's not only valid, it's valid in a way. So he's saying she's saying he makes a place for that. Aristotle's not writing as if we don't have sense organs, as if we are disembodied, bodiless beings that never do yoga, never dance, or never have sex, and never take walks, and don't have bodies, right? We're not disembodied sort of abstractions. That's what I was trying to say. So the love of abstraction, I think for Arendt, that encourages the potential of fanaticism, political fanaticism, religious fanaticism. Because if you're living in an abstraction, you're up here. You're actually not looking around at what appears. You're coming, to use a kind of a different language, you're coming with a pre-programmed script that you attach to all your experiences. And, it's actually, I think there's a lot of traditions that talk about the problem with that, of course. But anyhow, I'm having fun with this. So she's saying this world is diverse. Now, what do you do with diversity? Diversity actually is an interesting thing. I think, on the one hand, society celebrates it in a superficial way, though. I don't think we really want to. I think we're a little afraid of it, actually. We're certainly afraid. I can tell you we're afraid of artistic diversity. A lot of people out there think a movie has to be a certain way, and that way may not be very good. I mean, what do you do if if people, well, I don't want to name titles, Oscar week is upon us. And I mean, look, we all have our opinions, right? And sort of, but you know what I'm saying. You take what I'm saying. She says this diversity is matched by an equally astounding diverseness of sense organs. Again, she's mentioned, these sense organs. Interesting choice. It's a medical. So she has this rhapsodic lyrical prose, but she inserts into her prose entertainment value. Sense organs. Isn't that interesting? That's part of her prose, is this interesting combination. Remember, I said Hannah Arendt wants to embrace the world. She's a world embracer, not a world denier. Sense organs among the animal species, so that what actually appears to living creatures assumes the greatest variety of form and shape. Every animal species lives in a world of its own. Still, all sense-endowed creatures have appearance as such in common. First, an appearing world, and second, and perhaps even more important, the fact that they themselves are appearing and disappearing creatures. And this is the most important, drum roll. She's such a beautiful prose style. She structures the end of the paragraph, everything is moving. I shouldn't be interrupting. So the fact that they themselves are appearing and disappearing creatures, we appear to disappear, that there always was a world before their arrival, and there always will be a world after their departure. See, it's like this beautiful symmetry, the world before arrival. So if you took on Hannah Arendt's point of view, I mean, the degree to which this is, again, this is not a preachy text. I mean, I don't even consider it's not, and it's not tendentious, and she doesn't have, as I said, I think the last episode I said it's not really a book, really a persuasion. It's a book, it's an inquiry into what it is to think, and we haven't even gotten to thinking yet, really, right? I don't think. We're still on appearances. She again, in the tradition Hannah Arendt is working in, we go slowly and we start from origins. We start from, well, we appear. Isn't it interesting we appear? And then things appear to us. What about that? So Hannah Arendt likes to dwell on that. She's a little bit like a jazz, she probably, I don't know if she liked jazz. I know Mary McCarthy was a jazz buff. There's a video of Duke Ellington and Mary McCarthy hanging out. I got to play that, Dick Cavett. I think Hannah Arendt probably is more classical music. I don't know. But it's actually how we jazz improvisers work. It's so damn similar. It really, really is. It's kind of like, I don't know. Think about it. But anyhow, what would your life be like if you assume that there's a world before you, and you assume there's a world that will be here long after you're gone? Well, I can tell you one thing is you might care a little bit about future generations more, certainly, ethically, than if you thought it was just all over with just you dying out. There's a little bit of, it's interesting. There's a sense of responsibility that comes in with that. She means business. She's got a kind of, she means business in her prose as much as she means to, I think she enchant us. She means to enchant us with her syntax and the way she constructs her sentences, and she also means business in a certain sense. After all, she is German. Is that, To be alive means to live in a world that preceded one's own arrival and will survive one's own departure. She repeats it. So she ended a paragraph with that concept, and then she starts the next paragraph with a restatement of it in different words. So it means it must be pretty important to repeat yourself like that. And I think it's also incantation a little bit like it's this. Hannah Arendt really loved Augustine. See, I have this idea that every writer, every artist is influenced by things, and the things that they really like. Like I when I play piano, there's all this, there are, I'll be very honest with you, there's nothing in my piano playing that doesn't come from something I deeply loved and studied. It just won't appear. It has some connection, and she's no different. She was taken with a particular text of Augustine, or she liked Kant, and that's gonna work. That's gonna work its way into her prose, even though she's Jewish and not Christian, and she's not an Augustinian. Although I suspect Hannah Arendt would say that most Augustinians aren't really, probably misunderstand Augustine anyhow, right? So it's always the case, right? Schools of thought, just like Freudians and Freud, and Marx, of course, Marxists and Marx, et cetera, et cetera. But anyhow, I'm having fun. But should I do more, or is that? I don't know. I feel like, I feel like I should end there. I feel that's a pretty decent, I hope, close reading, because I'm getting close to the sentences and commenting on what they might mean and all that. Let me skip ahead, and then we'll conclude. This is a page later. Oh, here we go. God, there's so much here. It's so good. She says the lived experience of the length of a year changes radically throughout our life. A year that to a 5-year-old constitutes a full fifth of his existence must seem much longer than when it will constitute a mere 20th or 30th of his time on earth. We all know how the years revolve quicker and quicker as we get older until, with the approach of old age, they slow down again because we begin to measure them against the psychologically and somatically anticipated date of our departure. Against this clock inherent in living beings who are born and die stands objective time. She puts objective in quotes. I mean, it's real, but it's not real, both, right? Kind of. I don't know. Objective, it's factual. Objective time, according to which the length of a year is always the length of a year. Never changes. It's like, this is seconds. If I go like, that's time. Right? I just made up just now, but kind of time. Rhythm. That's jazz music. That's rock and roll, hip hop. I love salsa music, Puerto Rican music, Brazilian music, all the music's the beat. Swing dance, swing. I mean, not that, what I just played is not that stuff. I'm just saying the idea of, right? That's objective time. That never changes. It doesn't vary. This, the length of a year, objective time. She says this is the time of the world and its underlying assumption, regardless of any religious or scientific belief, is that the world has neither beginning nor end. An assumption that seems only natural for beings who always come into a world that preceded them and will survive them. See, it's only the idiocy of human beings that they invent systems where on such and such a date the world will end. I know so, because a voice told me. Or, in other words, people come in and instead of accepting this, for lack of a better word, natural order that she's trying to, they impose things on it and say, well, we got to get ready for, the bomb that's going to come, or this or that, or I know for a fact we've only been here a few thousand years because someone told me that, or something. I don't know. There's just all kinds of nonsense. But she's saying, she's trying to get away from such disfigurement and untruth, right? A little bit, and saying, well, she's smart. She sees where the readers. She anticipates writerly and readerly. Is readerly a word? She anticipates readerly objections. Look what she does. We've just been through all this. She says, in contrast to the inorganic there-ness of lifeless matter, this table, this piano, I'm not sure these are lifeless, but okay, they're lifeless compared to, say, a human being right. In contrast to the inorganic there-ness of lifeless matter, living beings are not mere appearances. So she says, okay, you folks that are worried that we focus too much on the superficial, I'll concede your point. There's more going on. We're not just appearance. It's kind of like, is she placating that reader, that hypothetical reader? I don't know. Just, I'm again having fun with this. Fun. This is this is both a serious deep text and a fun text. It's life affirming. It's serious. It's there's a lot of humor Hannah Arendt is like loves irony too. That's another thing we might have to deal with, because even in what I just read, there's like rhetorical irony too. Irony. Okay. To be alive means to be possessed by an urge towards self-display, which answers the fact of one's own appearingness. Living things make their appearance. Again, that's italicized. Living things make their appearance like actors on a stage set for them. I put on my tie. We're actors on the stage, and I'm going to sit at the piano. She's saying let's get real here. We have to show up. Just like I had to show up in this podcast and present myself, Everybody will do it a different way, but I think I'll stop there. She's, again, in this tradition that Hannah Arendt, in which she is working, she starts early on. You see how she's doing that? She's going to, other thinkers start in medias res. In other words, these are thinkers that make more assumptions. Hannah Arendt wants to assume very little in a way. I mean, she wants to start more from the beginning. So she's saying, well, what is it to be human? Kind of what she's doing, right? What is it when we show up? What does that mean? She's starting there rather than, she doesn't assume we all the questions have been answered, really. But she is saying there are all these facts in the world, nevertheless. And it's the dance between there are facts in the world, there's an objectivity, and, we approach the world from a particular point of view. I can't see the world from a point of view, from an experience that's not my own experience. I've only got my own experience, so it's a dance between these two realities, I think. And I think that dance will continue as we do this series. I'm gonna continue to do these, hopefully, and a lot of work goes into it in preparation, and I'm going to do some aesthetic series, 2 of them upcoming. I already hinted at some of it's going to do a little bit with the Beatles and a little bit music, but don't know what else, some other things too. So I do hope you will join me as you have thus far. And I also thank you for tuning in immensely. And I hope you do have a great weekend. Journey of an Aesthete. Thank you.